Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise in this place. It's just a tremendous honor and privilege to represent the constituents of Calgary-Rocky Ridge. And the constituents of Calgary-Rocky Ridge, many of them have very strong feelings on this budget, and it's no mystery that our party is opposed to this budget. We're opposed to the Budget Implementation Act, and notwithstanding the 400-odd amendments that have been introduced and suggested, I mean, we're going to do what we can to try and salvage something from this budget, and we'll see about how this goes on amendment. But I don't think that any number of amendments could possibly salvage this budget in total. So I'm rather down on this budget, as are most of the constituents that I've spoken to about it. And there are several key aspects of this budget that really still need to be addressed. And this budget, when it came out, I think it came out, the book was about 400 pages long. This Budget Implementation Act is similar in length. And nowhere in any of these documents will you see the words balanced budget. And one might ask, well, is that important? Is this an issue? Well, it's important for two reasons. First of all, it's prudent management to eventually either have a balanced budget or have some kind of a plan toward a balanced budget. All 10 provinces and all 3 territorial governments either are running currently a balanced budget or have a clearly articulated plan and path to a balanced budget. The only jurisdiction, the only government in Canada that does not have any type of plan whatsoever for a balanced budget is the federal government. The only finance minister in Canada, among all the provincial and territorial governments, including the federal government, that has no plan for a balanced budget is this finance minister. And that's disappointing for its own sake, or even just on the point of the policy alone. But why this is even more important, or particularly disappointing, is that this government ran on a very clear promise that it made. It said, I've called it up here, on page 12 of the Liberal platform in the 2015 election, it says, quote, "We will run modest short-term deficits of less than $10 billion in each of the next 2 fiscal years to fund historic investments in infrastructure and our middle class. After the next 2 fiscal years, the deficit will decline and our investment plan will return Canada to a balanced budget in 2019. So they promised no more than $10 billion. They promised to return to balance in 2019. And this wasn't just something they tucked away in some obscure part of their platform and hoped that nobody would notice. This is something they took to the doors. This was something that they said there would be a modest budget only to facilitate this infrastructure spending that they had planned. And I actually want to just depart for one moment and raise how their infrastructure plan is going along. Not too long ago, the Prime Minister made his first visit to Calgary in quite some time, and he came to make an historic spending announcement while he was there in the name of their infrastructure plan. $1.53 billion for the Green Line, an important infrastructure piece for the city of Calgary, a critical piece of infrastructure. The only problem is these are funds that were committed and announced by the previous government. So this government flies around the country re-announcing projects that were already announced, in some cases like this one, before they were even elected, and taking credit for it, and it's seeming to expect extraordinary credit for these projects. But, Madam Speaker, I don't want to digress too far. The whole point is that this budget is a broken election promise They promised no more than $10 billion in deficits and a return to balance by 2019, and the finance minister will not acknowledge in any way that these were commitments made and ignores all questions put to him, including at committee where he was asked repeatedly when the budget will be balanced, to which he ignored the questions. So enough about that, that part of it. That alone, of course, is enough reason to render this budget and its implementation act unworthy of support. But I want to move briefly to the carbon tax. So the previous speaker devoted his time to his defense of the carbon tax. And the carbon tax, let's even just set aside the arguments for and against a tax on carbon. But what about evidence-based policy, and what about transparency and openness with Canadians? This government refuses to tell Canadians what the tax will cost. Surely that is a minimum standard that this government could hold itself to just simply be honest with Canadians, share with Canadians what this tax is going to cost, as they compel provinces, some of them against their will, some of them in contravention of their own climate change strategies that they have developed through carbon capture, like in the province of Saskatchewan, without telling Canadians what this will cost them, and claiming all the time that this is, they keep saying revenue neutral. Well, do we not know what revenue neutral means? One member once asked me in an earlier debate on this. And I think most Canadians know that that's code for it's really going to actually cost us a whole bunch and you just won't tell us how much. The first part of revenue neutral that is flagrantly false is the fact that there will be GST on the carbon tax that the federal government is going to collect. Well, that's not revenue neutral. That's a tax on the tax that the federal government is going to keep. As far as the provinces and the latitude that this government says that it is leaving provinces to decide how they will deal with the carbon tax, that's not revenue neutral to a family. If a family has to pay a whole bunch more tax on all the normal things that normal families spend money on, like gasoline so they can get to work or take their children to school, and it doesn't matter whether one puts gasoline in a car and drives a child to school, or whether one pays the bus fee so that their child can take a bus to school. This tax applies to all of them. This tax puts giant holes in municipal governments' budgets because municipalities have to pay this tax, and they have to pay the tax when they fuel their buses, so that if people that take public transit still have their cost increased and still have to pay the carbon tax. So food, heating homes in a cold country, Madam Speaker, transportation, these are all things that all normal Canadians spend money on and are made more expensive by this carbon tax. So I wish this government would please just spare us this talk of revenue neutrality, because it's just not washing with Canadians. It really actually doesn't even make any sense. Perhaps the Prime Minister came closest to his true feelings when he encouraged Canadians to, quote, make better choices, unquote, or change behavior when people asked, well, how am I going to afford to fill my car or so that I can go to work? But time marches on, Madam Speaker, and I'm not sure how much time I have left. All right, well, I need to move on to the pipelines. And on page 290 of this budget, in an interesting part there, and the finance minister revealed in his budget on page 290 that he basically there took credit for pipelines that were yet to be built, like the Trans Mountain expansion. The finance minister acknowledged the differential and the significant discount that Canadians receive for their energy products because of a shortage in pipeline, and said that the deficit should, or that the revenue should improve because new pipe is going to reduce the differential. Well, here we are, Madam Speaker. The pipe isn't any closer to being built. We just spent $4.5 billion on an old pipe without even talking and finding out yet what the cost is going to be to build the new pipe and to deal with all the obstacles that were preventing it from being built by Kinder Morgan. And in the budget, their own budget projections rely on new tax revenue that will result from a pipeline that isn't even built yet.
My God.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Status of Women.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for his remarks. Madam Speaker, I wonder if the honourable member could acknowledge back in 2006, I remember it well, the finance minister of the day left a $13 billion surplus, Madam Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, the country was in deficit with the Harper government before the recession hit. And, Madam Speaker, fast forward a few years later, the Harper government created a fake surplus by massively cutting veterans organizations, women's organizations. They closed Status of Women organizations and offices across the country, Madam Speaker. And of course, we know they sold auto shares at a loss. I wonder if the honourable member, as he spoke about evidence and evidence-based decision-making, would acknowledge those facts.
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Madam Speaker, I maybe caution the member there on his assertion of many of the things he said as facts. And I will point out to this member, we hear this usually not on the record, usually in heckles that occasionally come across from the other side about the massive deficits that were incurred, and yet we know that this party, when it was in opposition, threatened to bring down the government because the deficit that was on offer to deal with an unprecedented financial crisis in conjunction with our G7 partners wasn't a big enough deficit for them then. They were going to bring down the government because it wasn't big enough. They wanted the biggest deficit possible at the time, so I will take no lessons from the Liberals on deficits.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. Over the last 2.5 years, we've talked a lot in this House about the need for equity and equality for women. And the title of this budget was called Gender and Growth Budget. And I'm wondering whether my colleague finds it curious that despite that title, Gender and Equality, there's very little in the bill. And would the Conservatives agree that we need pay equity now?
Honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Well, he brought up the issue of the budget theme and title, and I will say what a cynical and disingenuous title and theme for its budget. It's insulting and condescending. It mentions the word gender some 400 times throughout it, and yet imposes new taxes on women that many observers have pointed out will perhaps be disproportionately paid by women. So the shameless pandering of this party through the use of just buzzwords and distraction is indeed disappointing.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Guelph.
Speaker, and thanks to the honourable member from Calgary Rocky Ridge for his presentation tonight. In a previous question, I had indicated from Alberta.ca the incredible success that Alberta is seeing in the growth of their economy, the growth of retail sector and exports. The honourable member was mentioning in his presentation about the carbon pricing program in Alberta, and I just wanted to draw to his attention that a family of four with...
If I'm having trouble hearing the question, it's a problem, and I think that it's a problem as well for the person who's going to have to answer the question, which I know that he's very capable of. So I would say that, instead of having the discussions back and forth between other MPs, they should wait and stand to try to ask questions if they wish. The honourable for Guelph, can you please wrap it up?
Thank you. A family of four with an annual income of $95,000 will receive a $540 tax cut in a situation where they pay $500. So they're actually getting more money back as a result of the carbon pricing program. Would the honourable member not agree that the people of Alberta are creating tremendous growth in their province and succeeding with the tax benefits through the carbon program?
The member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
This member would is tonight hitting it out of the park. We can clip him and put it into our householders and our next election material. My province has been through a devastating economic collapse, and when you fall this far, you can drop anything high. When you drop anything high enough, it'll bounce a little bit maybe when it hits the bottom.